So once upon a time in Game of Thrones, the show had established a Mad Queen, and it was not a jarring, poorly developed character arc that forces you to retcon and reframe everything for that character's story up until that point. I'm talking about a character that was on a descent to madness from the very start, eventually culminating in what could only be compared to a real-world attack on St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. Don't ever forget that. Cersei Lannister blew up Westeros' version of St. Peter's Basilica. Seriously, this is what happened, and we need to talk about what happened after this because it makes no sense. Here's a reminder.
Long may she reign.
So whoever these people are going along with this long may she reign head nodding is one thing, because there's a good chance that there's nobody in the city currently to oppose her. Maybe we'll revisit this in a minute. But this is the conclusion of this plotline for Season 6, but surely there's going to be fallout in the following season. But that doesn't happen. Game of Thrones initially had numerous themes and plotlines, but one thing that remained consistent is the actual Game of Thrones itself, which is truly just a never-ending conflict for the line of succession. It's the most consistent conflict in the history of Westeros after Aegon's conquest. The glaring opponents for Cersei seem almost powerless until that scene that we get of Olenna Tyrell meeting with Ellaria Sand, the Sand Snakes, and then Varys, who connects everyone with a suggestion of an alliance they will all form with Daenerys.
What is my heart's desire?
Fire and blood.
And yes, this is a conflict, but other than Olenna Tyrell, Dorne and Daenerys were already present as an inevitable conflict before Cersei blew up the Sept of Baelor. Now, as fans, just watching the show, we have no idea the capacity for war that Dorne could present, so maybe that's why no serious battles or anything like that had occurred. For all we know from just watching the show, Dorne may not even have an army, but when the Ironborn are instructed to ferry the Dornish army by Tyrion later in Season 7, I'm sure we'll get a better idea. But on their way to Dorne, they are ambushed by Euron's fleet, and I guess just never mind about Dorne or their army or anything. I guess this guy took power and decided that Dorne just wasn't really developed well enough for fans to care whether they're in the show anymore or not, so he just waited to make a cameo in the final episode of the series, or something like that. Whatever the showrunners told him to do, I think is what happened. Whatever. But speaking of forgotten armies, remember the Tyrell army? I said just a minute ago that there's nobody left in the city to oppose Cersei, but that means after this scene...
What's happening? He's beaten us. That's what's happening.
Mace Tyrell just sent everyone home. Is that what we're supposed to believe? Well, okay, I guess. Fair enough. But wait, who are all those other people that cheered about the union of the crown and the faith? Oh, that's right. The people of King's Landing who taunted and disparaged Cersei during her Walk of Atonement. Unless we are to assume that they all were standing in close proximity to the Sept when it blew up, surely some of them survived, and after being emboldened by the High Sparrow, of course a conflict with the small folk will be imminent, right? Well, not in this show. Besides, the small folk need to be prepared to be mindlessly burned alive by Daenerys in Season 8, and hopefully by then they'll all forget about this and seek out refuge and protection from Cersei while Daenerys is revealed to be the real Mad Queen. It's like the small folk forgot all about Cersei blowing up the Sept, and they decided they needed to choose the lesser of the two evils as they run to Cersei for protection, as only someone would if they had the script for what's about to happen. It almost sounds contrived. The point I'm trying to get across with my miserable dry sarcasm is that there needed to be some form of consequence after blowing up the Sept, some form of conflict, but nothing truly rises up. The conflict of succession is so crucial to the entire series and has been from the very start, that even if you work out all the laws and somehow deem that Cersei has a rightful claim, there would have been opposition for countless reasons. Cersei killed Westeros' equivalent to the Pope. She murdered the Queen. She murdered Lancel and Kevin Lannister. She's a known terrorist and kinslayer. And after the suicide of Tommen, it could be fair to assume her immediate ascension to the throne could cause speculation that she might even be guilty of regicide. The only reasonable explanation for all of this is that maybe nobody truly knows that Cersei was behind the Septa Baelor being blown up. And you know what? That's probably it. That makes sense. I'm sorry I wasted your time. Nobody is mad at Cersei in the show anymore because they just don't know what she's actually guilty of. They don't know that she did it.
Heard Cersei's queen now.
Heard she blew up the Great Sept. That must have been something to see. Boom. Boom. Boom.
Oh, well that's kind of awkward.
Boom.
Anyway, when this all happens without any major conflict arising specifically because of this, I think a lot of us could accept it if it were to further show Cersei's descent into madness in a different way. This arc has been established actually pretty well, and after her conflict with the High Sparrow, the only redeeming aspect for Cersei may be her relationship with Tommen, but sadly he killed himself. I'm sure this will be a huge plot point for Cersei going mad, and especially a plot point between Cersei and Jaime.
We never talked about Tommen.
Yeah, and we never will.
There's nothing to say.
Okay, maybe the real consequence is here with Jaime. Cersei killed countless people, most of which are totally innocent, and she burned them all.
Burn them all!
Just like the Mad King, she used wildfire to burn them all. This is it. This is the one thing that Cersei has done that will permanently destroy her relationship with Jaime. After all Jaime has felt he's lost by killing the Mad King to protect the people of King's Landing from being burned alive by wildfire, obviously this is going to be so easy for the showrunners to make that connection, and Jaime is going to finally turn his back on Cersei here. But of course not. The moment Jaime decides he's going to turn his back on Cersei is when he realizes that she lied to Daenerys about fighting together instead of against each other. Burning people alive with wildfire isn't enough. Driving your son to suicide, that's not it either. No, Cersei lying to an enemy is where Jaime decided to draw the line. Alright, let's go ahead and break down the real problem with all of this, and it attaches itself to a lot of problems by the time we get to Season 8. I'm really big on understanding the world building, the overall moral compass of that world, and its characterization. The world is not like ours, so what is considered good or bad is all relative to how it is framed by the story's universe, not ours. And as long as everything is consistent, the audience learns how the rules work, and the story you're telling your audience will be viewed through that lens. It's why in the first season, fans watch Ned Stark behead a man, but also still view and understand Ned as honorable, because those are the rules. Cersei, from the very beginning, did not play by the rules of morality established in the show, so for her to gradually become more extreme and vile in the way she attacked her enemies remained consistent, and each dishonorable move she made was just a little worse than the one before, and when it seemed that she was cornered at the end of Season 6, she performed her most heinous act to avoid consequences for her prior actions. This all works as far as a story structure. This is really good. I say Cersei is the real Mad Queen of this story because I'm judging her based on the rules established by the show and the framing. But at the start of Season 7, it is obvious that Daenerys is being reframed by the show, and the consequences or possible conflicts for Cersei has been dialed back quite a bit. She's presented as a much more mild threat, and by the end of Season 8, when it comes to tyrannical leaders, the only thing that could eclipse Cersei basically blowing up the St. Peter's Basilica in Westeros would be Daenerys burning down the entire Vatican City. When you compare the horrible things done by Cersei and Daenerys all the way up until Season 8 before Daenerys burns the city, act for act and motive for motive, Cersei is clearly much more intentionally cruel in her actions. Then if you compare Cersei and Daenerys' best acts from the beginning, there's actually not any comparison. The most you could do is point out some moments that you could empathize with Cersei, but she hasn't performed any redeeming acts. Cersei has been villainous from start to finish. Even though her character was nuanced and offered opportunities to show a more human side, Cersei's story naturally flowed to her most extreme act of evil, which is blowing up the Septa Baelor. Now, I push back on Daenerys going mad or evil or whatever you want to call it because there was not a consistent thread for her character becoming more and more malicious that wasn't also paralleled by her character also simultaneously trying to do the morally good thing for her people. She's a morally gray character, and she wasn't always good and she wasn't always bad, but she was always in pursuit of doing something good. Cersei was only morally gray when you see her affection for her children, but beyond this, her actions only grew more disturbing and, very important, her actions were intentional. They were malicious. She's not given the same balance to suggest a conflict about how to be good or bad. An issue with Daenerys going mad or evil, it wouldn't be as polarizing if we didn't have so many characters that we have been able to analyze, compare, and contrast. But the showrunners for Game of Thrones decided that Daenerys was going to go mad or evil whether it made sense relative to the rules established for morality or not, and regardless of whether they had already developed a character going mad. But you can't have two Mad Queen arcs, so they just abandoned that one that actually had a natural evolution from the start of the series. Like, Daenerys burning King's Landing may have never been great thematically, but I bet it would have landed with more fans differently if we didn't already have a Mad Queen arc that was developed for Cersei. To this day, I think a lot of fans would struggle to explain why Daenerys burned specifically the innocent people of King's Landing, while mostly ignoring the Red Keep. But not a single fan would struggle to explain why Cersei blew up the Sept of Baelor. Forcing Daenerys to be evil or mad in the end regulated Cersei to the background with not much to do but be a device to provoke Daenerys' madness. I'm not much for being a fanfiction writer, but let me know what you think about this alternative to what we actually got. I think thematically, it would have made more sense for Daenerys and her forces to, just like they were, win the battle, but while Daenerys and Drogon sit there looking across the city, waiting for those bells to ring, suddenly Cersei has wildfire go off everywhere, maybe even going off underneath Daenerys, possibly killing her or Drogon. Cersei basically has won the battle by burning them all, just like the Mad King. Essentially, have Cersei do what Daenerys does, but instead of dragonfire, Cersei uses wildfire. And instead of Jon killing Daenerys in the throne room, it's Jaime killing Cersei in the throne room, bringing Jaime and Cersei's story full circle. Now, obviously, more creative minds than mine would have to work out just about every other character's plot from there, but I'm just saying, thematically, what we actually got was dissatisfying, and in my opinion, one of the most disappointing parts of Game of Thrones is wasting a really well-established villain and the Mad Queen arc for Cersei. What do you think? Maybe you love the Daenerys going mad plot, and if you did, maybe you'd like to argue with me over this video right here.